I've been seeing pumpkins pop up everywhere on social media in like lots of different mediums, and I've decided I need to jump on the bandwagon. So I whipped up this simple little pumpkin patchwork mini quilt so I can get the pumpkins out of my system. My color palette for this is pretty simple, although I did make a bunch of different mock-ups when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do. But this palette is very simple. We've just got the orange, blue, and a couple browns because I haven't decided which I like. And the cool thing about this orange is that it's an ombre, so I should get a nice variety of different colored pumpkins, which should be fun and interesting to look at. Wait till the end of the video if you want to see how those other mock-ups look. It could be fun to do some tiny little blocks in each of the pumpkins, like some stars or maybe a 16 patch or something like that, or maybe even an improv piece could be fun and a good way to use up some scraps. But I think with the ombre from this fabric, there should be enough visual interest. Along with that, I've also got the shimmery gold polka dots. So I think I'm good on visual interest. Conversely, actually, I'm going to turn this one and use the wrong side of the fabric because I don't want this busy pattern in the tiny little stem pieces here. So I'm going to use the background. Although, if I'm going to use this one, I don't like the back of this fabric, the wrong side of this fabric, at all. So if I use this fabric, I'm probably going to fussy cut so I use like these strips and avoid the bigger flowers, hopefully. And I still haven't decided which brown I like better. I'm not a big fan of either of them, frankly. I might do a mixture. I think that's probably what I'll do. I'll probably do a mixture of both of those browns. Isn't it funny how different a wrong side can look? I mean, you can't even see hardly any of the pattern from the front on this one, and then this one, it's so obvious and not very attractive at all. So, okay, I have a plan. I need to press this. This is very wrinkly. This was an end of bolt piece, and so I've got a lot of wrinkles I need to press out, and then I can cut. Okay, I am so annoyed right now. I don't even know if this is going to show up on camera. Okay, so all along the middle part of my fabric, this is the middle fold, and out this way are my selvage edges. I have a stain from using Best Press. I've never had this happen before, ever. And it didn't happen with the other fabrics that I just pressed either. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe I was a little heavy-handed with it, maybe? And on top of the staining, which I'm not sure if you can see, there is a very distinct sun damage all along the center fold line. I got the fold out, but it's got this staining, and it's just really annoying and disappointing. I thought I would have some really straightforward pressing, and then I could start cutting. The only part that stained was the middle. I used the Best Press on the whole thing, and that's the only place it stained. So I don't know what happened, but I'm going to have to cut very creatively to avoid the staining. I think for my super long... Oh wait, here's another stain actually. So there was some on the edges too. I'm going to have to cut creatively. So I have some 24-inch strips that if I cut regularly, I'm going to hit the staining. But if I cut from the sides where there isn't a big splotch, if I cut this way for my big long strips, I think I should be fine. I'm just going to start cutting now so I can get past it and then get to some piecing, the good stuff. I might just use the medium and the dark because I have to cut more from another strip because I don't have enough from that one strip. So we'll see, I have choices. So before I cut out my background pieces, I want to do a little fabric audition with these oranges to see what pops the most. So here's my lightest, and here's my darkest. And I think I'm definitely leaning towards the darker ones. I think the blue is saturated enough that it's sort of washing out the really light colors. Let's see the middle by itself. I think it's holding its own, but just barely. But I think that, yeah, the darkest ones are definitely my favorite. So I'm going to put aside the lightest ones from each from each batch that I did and go with the medium and the dark. Except that only gives me 8, so I need one of them. Go with this one. Put these aside. So I can actually do a little bit of a mock-up, get a look at what it'll look like. I might make the pumpkins land in an ombre maybe, or maybe I should just mix it up. I don't know. I think I'll decide later after I've made the pumpkins. Cutting fabric is absolutely my least favorite part of quilting, but I love when all of the pieces are sort of done and together and neat and labeled and everything. It's a very satisfying feeling to be done with that part. You might notice that these 2 squares are very similar sizes. There's just a 1/4 inch difference, and that's for a very subtle reason. I'm going to use those squares to round out, maybe not round out, but to give shape to my pumpkins. And you can see it's a very, very slight difference. So this is the one with bigger corners, and this is the one with smaller corners. And it just adds a little bit of variety, very subtly, to these pumpkins. You might have also noticed that I didn't cut small pieces for the stems, and that's because I'm going to do a little bit of freezer paper piecing. Freezer paper foundation piecing, whatever you want to call it. And that way I can get slightly different stems for each of my pumpkins. And I left them just a little bit bigger than they need to be because I want to have a little wiggle room so I don't make mistakes so I hopefully don't make mistakes with my paper piecing. I'm going to go ahead and work on the stem unit last and start with the pumpkin unit because I want to look at this pretty gold shiny fabric. I took a moment off camera to arrange my pumpkins how I want them to land in my finished piece, and I took a picture so I won't forget because I want to be deliberate about the placement of my slightly different shaped pumpkins. So for my bigger corners, I have enough for 4 pumpkins, so I'm going to do this one, this one, this one, and that one. And I also took the time to make diagonal lines across the backs of each of these squares because I'm going to need them to sew my line on. So anyway, I'm going to give 4 of these squares to each of these 4 pumpkins, and then 4 of these squares for the remaining 5 pumpkins. When I'm using such small pieces for these sew and flip corners, I like to use a little bit of glue. And it doesn't matter what glue you use, presumably, because it's not going to end up in your finished quilt. It's going to be cut out. So what I do is I'll place all my corners, just to get them out of the way, how they're supposed to go in all their beautiful glory. And then I'll take this one, and this is going to be the side that's cut off. So I'm going to put a little bit of glue on that corner. Just a little smear of glue. And I'm going to try not to pass that center line. I can't see it from this side of the fabric, but I can visualize it. I can imagine it. And then I'll stick it down just like that. And with this glue stick, I don't heat set it. It dries pretty quick, I think. So I will just let it dry naturally, and then I'll take it to the machine like that. And I don't even think you probably need to let it dry all the way because it's pretty tacky. You just want to make sure that you don't go over that line because you don't want to sew over the wet glue, because you'll get your needle all gummed up. That reminds me, I need to put in a new needle on my machine. So just keep an eye on the one that you want to go into the corner. Give a good healthy dab of glue and stick it down. And this isn't gonna eliminate all movement. You would have to be really precise on that line if you didn't want it to shift at all. This is basically just to keep it in place so that when I take it to the machine, I can sew this and this and this and this all at once without worrying about this corner falling off while I'm sewing that corner. Okay? So I'm going to do that for all of my lovely little pumpkins. And if you do get glue over that center line. It's really easy to peel up again. It's not like a super tacky glue. The problem is with the purple glue that I use is that sometimes it will stain fabric and other times it doesn't stain fabric. And I never know which one will stain and which won't, so I just try to be extra careful when I'm using it. I should probably explain for people who haven't done stitch and flip corners before. The line is where we want to sew. So sometimes you'll draw a line and then you want to sew a 1/4 inch from that line, but for stitch and flip you want to sew right on that line. And actually I get the very best results when I sew just to the other side of the line. So I don't want to sew on this side. I want to sew just barely on the other side of the line on this side, on the side that's going to be trimmed off. So it's very important that you don't get that mixed up. So right on the other side, this way, on the waist side, the waist corner, whatever you want to call it. In order to do the stitch and flip, you have to have really good visibility for this line, and I've always had such a hard time. I have to get my head right up and look right down into there to see the line I'm supposed to sew on, and it only occurred to me today that I could switch my foot out with one that has less stuff in the middle. See? This is the one I've been using, and there's that metal right there that makes it really hard to see the line, and on this one, it is clear. And actually, there's a little bit of a indication of where the needle will come down in the center there too. So I'm going to try this one out, and I have some optimistic feelings about it. So I'm going to drop my needle just barely to the side of that line. I don't even know if you can see that on camera. And then, oh, this is so much nicer already with this foot. And I like to go nice and slow. And my goal is to go on the other side of this line, but that doesn't always happen, and I'm okay with that. Oh yeah, I'm going to use this foot from now on for my stitch and flip corners. Perfect. I love that. I'm going to lower my needle. Oh, I missed it. Try again. Lower my needle. There. I think I missed it again. Oh well. See what happens. That'll do. Okay, so I'm just going to do that all the way around. I'm amazed at how easy that is to do with the camera in front of my face too with this foot. The nice thing about these corners is you don't have to be super accurate because you're not going to be matching anything up, and it isn't strange if pumpkins are a little misshapen and wonky. So it's really low pressure, no need for perfection sort of situation. The bodies of my pumpkins are done for now. They're looking a little bit silly and awkward right now because I still have the seam allowance in them, but they'll round out air quotes, a little bit more after I sew them into the block. But so far, they're looking good. And I'm ready to move on to the stems. So as I said before, these are my freezer paper foundation pieces. They're just real slapdash makeshift sort of things. And I marked one side of each of these folds with a little dash, and that's the side that I want my brown fabric for my stem to go on. I just gave these real quick, crisp folds before I get started because it makes it easier during the process. So I'm going to start with my dark brown fabric, and I always have to remind myself when I'm doing foundation piecing which way up I want my fabric to go. I'm pretty sure that I want to iron this piece down onto the wrong side of my fabric. And then when I fold this back, I will sew along this edge and that, yeah, okay, I'm pretty sure that's the right way. So I'll go ahead and press this down. Trying to aim towards the middle. I cut it big on purpose for some wiggle room, but I want to aim towards the middle to avoid these light flowers or lighter flowers. Then I'm going to give it a rough cut. Oh wow, these scissors need some help. And then I'll move on to the next one. But now, before I get ahead of myself, maybe I should do a little bit of planning, because I only want to do half of them in the dark and half in the light. So this one I purposely made so it doesn't have a super defined tilt up, but the other ones are a little more tilted mostly. So I'll do a little bit of both. So I'll do one of these, and maybe this one. I think I'll do 4 dark and 5 light, and that should be easy enough to change later on if I don't like the results. So I'm going to go ahead again, press this down, leaving a lot of extra room. Press that down. Give a snip. Hopefully my scissors will do better this time. There we go. It's all very rough, and I like to do this more than like cutting the pieces intentionally, like with a template or something, because it just is easier and there's not as much measuring and worrying and stuff. So I just like this method a little bit more. One more. Oops, I need to make sure I have a good 1/4 inch at least up above. Now let's go ahead and take these over to my cutting mat real quick. Okay, I have my trusty add a 1/4 ruler here, a nice long one too. I don't need a long one for this, but I like having a long one on hand. Anyway, I'm going to fold this back along that fold line, the nice creased fold line from earlier, and then I can butt up the edge right here of my ruler to my freezer paper. Then I'll do a cut, and I have a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. I'm going to do the next step at my sewing machine, but it's easier to demo here at my sewing table where I have some nice bright light and room to demo. So I'll take a piece and I'll fold this down, and I'm going to add the blue fabric, it's in a long strip right now, to the back. And the way, I was very generous with this, but generally the way to tell if your fabric is going to cover this piece is if you can look through and see that your fabric in the back is going to cover that piece, if that makes sense. And I've been generous enough that I don't need to worry about it. I can just match that up, take my rotary cutter or my scissors if I was over there again by the ironing board, and I'll just cut that real roughly, no measuring or anything. Then when I take this to my machine, I'm going to sew right along the edge of the freezer paper, as close as humanly possible. Sometimes I even go over the freezer paper a little bit. Either way, it doesn't matter because this is a very loose, not precise piece that I'm working on. So after I sew that, I can open it all up, and then I can cut off all the excess around the piece because it is basically the size I need. It's the width I need, but it's a little longer just so I have a little wiggle room when I'm putting it into my block. So all in all, pretty quick and easy for these little units, but paper piecing can be very complicated, much more complicated than this. For most of them, I lined up the edges just to be neater, but where was one? Oh, actually, I lined them all up. But if I didn't line those up, I would take the time before I opened them to even this out and get a good even seam behind so I didn't have a bunch of extra bulk when I open this up. Okay, so I'm gonna finger press these open and then take them to my iron. Okay, almost done. Give us a nice press. And then when I turn it over, you'll see that the fabric is covering all of the piece that I need to cut out. And actually, if I had thought about this beforehand, I might have put the blue down first and then the dark so that I could press towards the dark, because you can see the seam. So instead, I think, actually what I'm going to do for these ones anyway, is I'm going to cut them out, but then just repress the seam in the opposite direction to fix that. And then when I make my lighter brown stems, I'll put the blue part down first, and then I'll attach the stem, just so I can press to the dark more easily. But enough about paper piecing. I'm going to film the rest off camera so we can skip to putting the blocks together. As I'm looking at the stems with these pumpkins, I really don't think this light brown is pulling its weight. I think it's blending in too much. There's not enough contrast. So I really think I'm going to go and redo all of these, make them dark brown like that one. I'm going to have to redo a little bit of my work. Luckily, they don't take that long. So I'm just going to take these out and make more of those. Since I have finished all of my stems, the hardest part of the stem unit is done. I just have to attach these sides. And like I think I said before, that I made these a little bit longer so I can have a little bit of wiggle room on where I want to place them. For instance, I'm going to pay extra attention that I don't cut off my point, so I don't have this point get into my seam allowance. Or for one of the shorter stems, where's the short stem? So one of these stems, I make sure that I don't get too low down here and then have all my stem in the seam allowance. So I can sort of move that around until I find the sweet spot. Then I'm going to press my seams away from the stem. I like to usually press to the dark, but if I have a piece of fabric with a seam and a piece of fabric without a seam, I like to press towards the simpler piece of fabric. Next, I'm going to square up the edges real quick. I'm going to line up along this edge and the seam line just to make sure I don't get off. And then finally, I will sew on the other side to finish off my stem unit. Now to finish up this pumpkin, I just need to attach the pumpkin stem to the pumpkin body, just like that, and it will look like this. How cute is that? Although it's still a little wonky. It still has the seam allowance showing, so it's going to get a little bit cuter, a little bit nicer after it's sewn up. So all I need to do now is finish up all the rest of my cute little mini pumpkins, and then I'm going to add my sashing and my border, and that's all pretty straightforward, so I'm going to do that off camera. So let's go ahead and jump in the time machine and skip to the finished mini quilt top. This is the first of 3 mini quilts that I'll be making for part 2 of my free Quilting for Beginners series. I'm going to use them to show different ways to mark-based quilt and bind quilts, just a bunch of little different variations. This mini quilt was a lot of fun to make. I love the cute little pumpkins and their tiny little stems, and it really makes me want to make a mini quilt for every season and holiday. Maybe it could be a series sometime later on. I don't know. Sounds fun. I chose this blue background because pumpkins sort of make me think of cold blue mornings in the garden in the fall, but I think it would look good in a lot of different colors, maybe some more playful Halloween-y colors. So I made up a bunch of mock-ups I want to show you. Thanks for spending time with me today, quilters. If you want to support this channel and help me buy supplies and materials for future videos, please visit my Buy Me a Coffee page linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss upcoming videos. And I'll see you again real soon. Bye!